Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Story number 1. Autonomous Processing, written by HFY. Emma sat still looking at the map on the table littered with schematics. She started making a humming noise that attracted a few of the crew into the control room. When they saw her sitting there, they knew they had to be quiet. It was one of the first things that they were told when they were hired. She closed her eyes and started tapping her fingers on the metallic surface of the table. Then she stood up suddenly. "Ah!" she exclaimed with a smile. The captain sighed in relief and let go of his grip on the control panel. Emma stood up and ran towards the board next to the captain, pressing a few buttons quickly before taking command of the control wheel in the middle. A loud metallic clunk could be heard all over the ship as the damaged engine and a few other parts detached from the craft. Suddenly, the ship started to accelerate in an askew direction and began to slow turn and spin, making many of the crew members dizzy. Some of the newer members were nervous and scared, but the veterans smiled as they held on to whatever they could. They were calm because they had seen this happen before, remembering that Emma could save them from impossible circumstances. She was the trump card they held, and although her salary was expensive, she was worth every galactic coin. The ship picked up more and more speed, slowly closing up on the space barrier, the acceleration rate needed before a ship could produce a jump. The lights within the cabin turned red, and the AI in the control of the ship's systems was begging Emma to stop. A few of the newer recruits started freaking out, praying to their gods or entering whatever the mode of hysteria was for their particular species. Emma stayed focused on the screens in front of her. She clicked buttons and pulled levers without looking at the control panel. Loud sliding noises filled the ship as the whole wing was detached, leaving only the thrust engines with no way to control the vessel in tight maneuvers. Suddenly, the primary weapon systems went online, and Emma started using the recoil to add more acceleration, and as a rudimentary way to control the direction of the ship. They reached critical acceleration and broke the barrier. The jump was sudden, and those who were not holding onto something fell on the ground. Their destination planet was in sight, and Emma sent out a signal requesting help from a nearby space station. She raised her eyebrows and took a big breath and smiled. "Nice," she said, breaking the silence. Hassad noticed that Emma would do this whenever she completed a task. He wondered if this was something that humans would do, although he had only met a few in his lifetime because of their status and rarity. Humanity was the only species with what the Hellwoldians called autonomous processing. Haddis had learned about them growing up. Humanity was the youngest species that had reached the stars, beating the second youngest species by almost 43,000 Zeta cycles, or 1 billion human years. And even though there had only been a species for a couple of thousand human years, they had already technologically surpassed many of the older races without any help or interference. Many larger ships employed a human if they could afford it, and even though human slavery was illegal, some of the more depraved species still attempted it, although it almost always resulted in the human escaping, even if they acquired it as a child. Emma was still a teenager and was only available a couple of the months a year, so all the dangerous missions were done at that time. But it was the only way their company could afford a human. They knew that once she graduated from Human University, a much more significant corporation would offer much more. Humans initially only lived up to 100 years on their home planet. For a sentient species to live for such a short amount of time was unheard of. But it gave them the ability to learn incredibly fast. In 4 years, they could absorb what the Herillian took 100 or more years to learn. Not only that, they merely knew things without understanding how. At first, others thought that the humans were hiding something from them. Humans were able to complete extremely complicated calculations in seconds. If you placed them in a room, they could tell you who was a doctor, who was a criminal, and who was hungry or full by glancing at them. and in any physical activity, they could calculate where things would land and how to move their body for specific things to happen. Apparently, humans called this ability instinct. It was the result of having to calculate things to survive as they were evolving, although Hyrillian scientists gave it a more proper name of autonomous processing. Although humans had artificially extended their lifespan to 1,000 years, they still held the extreme cognitive abilities passed down from their ancestors. When this was discovered, every species of the universe tried employing human scientists to solve the most complicated problems, and any crew that held the human would always reach the other side, regardless of the monetary incentive. Many humans stayed in human solar systems and clusters because they found the jobs boring. Emma said she took the job to pay for university and because she was saving up for a ship to become an explorer. The first reason always confused any species whenever she said it, because humanity was the only race that did not have free schooling. But whenever anyone spent a week with her on board, they understood the second reason. Because if a human wanted to do something, they were excellent at it. End of story. Story number 2. Terran Infantry, written by British Tea Company. Address from Supreme Commander Lavtal to his officers. I cannot stress this enough. I couldn't stress this enough, whether it is to the High Council's deaf ears or the Chartstar. It is just an excellent thing that the Terran Republic has decided that this end of the galaxy isn't worth their attention, save for the occasional mercenary activity that freelance soldiers are doing. That's with just the Terrans themselves, from the lowliest meat shield to the highest commander. Terrans refer to the lowest caste of their army as the E-caste, from E1 to E9. The lowest of the low are colloquially referred to as rookies or greenhorns. The more experienced Terran soldiers jokingly refer to the new recruits as Tatars, slang for tactical ablative armor. Well, the reoccurring and perhaps somewhat irritating inside joke amongst Terrans. Any other race that has gone to war with them will know that this is in truth very literal. Terran infantry run at their enemies like they have nothing to fear, which is quite true. Just try to imagine 500 pounds of steel and fury coming your way, shrugging off most small arms weapons like they're nothing. The amount of kinetic rounds it takes to stop a charging Terran is the same amount of rounds they need to kill an entire squad of your men. Many people would like to point out that no armor is good enough to protect against energized melee weapons. Let me ask you and appeal to your common sense. Do you want to be within 6-foot radius of a 6-foot-tall, 225-pound semi-carnivorous creature that can tear heads off? Do you? Good. You shouldn't. I've seen too many times when single soldiers attempted melee combat against Terran soldier. This commonly ends with the Terran having a new scar to show off to his friends. Yes, for reasons beyond me, they think ugly flesh wounds are badges of honor, and the soldier in question having to be buried in a soup can. Don't even get me started on special forces, by the way. Omega forbid that you find yourself facing charging berserkers that can tear off doors on a ship. Terran officers are far worse than infantry, referred to as the O-class, from O1 to O12. Let me tell you something. You can tell how high a Terran is on the class by how well decorated his uniform is. The more well decorated it is, the better warrior and leader they are. If you ever happen to see a Terran with a bunch of shiny trinkets on his chest, you better run. If you ever see a Terran with gilded armor, it's probably already too late. Most officers tend to be older, but don't let that. Terran lifespans may be somewhat short, but they are the only race in the galaxy that permits gene modification. Many Terrans that are meant to be in retirement homes are still fit for frontline service, while others may have decided to be more creative in their modifications. I'd rather spare you all the details. But perhaps most disturbing thing about fighting Terrans is what they do with the dead. I was serving a few decades back, and I still would rather not talk about it. Dead bodies, their bones cracked up, their flesh torn off. Yes, the Terrans ate their enemies. They may have the decency to remain polite in table of dialogue, but mark my words, once this war starts, once the Terran Republic becomes irritated enough, Allmaker forbid it leads to this. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my videos. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I would just quickly like to give thanks to our Tier 5 members: Elithia, Barky, Feudicuel, Meridian117, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Albard and Gusta, Savage Patch Papa, and Lord Azrakal.